Welcome everyone back to our panel discussion. We're very excited to have this lineup of speakers who are going to really get in some more on some of these issues that we've already tackled on intellectual property, patenting, genetically modified practices. We're going to be tackling things about seed activism, farmers' rights, what does seed sovereignty look like, across the different countries and continents. We're going to have a perspective also from Kenya. We will also get examples of things that you can do here locally. Bill has mentioned in the last session that Jack is going to be talking about open source mediums, so we're going to be tackling that. And then finally, Francesco is going to be also giving us the Slow Food International perspective. So Slow Food at an international level has been working on concepts of what GMOs mean and what the harms are, and they've created a position paper on what that means in that space. So this is kind of what the session is hopefully going to be about if we have all the speakers. But to start with, we're very happy to have Karine Péchard, who she defines herself as an anthropologist, a researcher, a food lover, and passionate about seeds. She's a research associate at the Graduate Institute Albert Hirschman's Center on Democracy. And her research is at the intersection of legal anthropology, agrarian studies, and she focuses on social movements, biotechnology, biodiversity, and IPs, intellectual property rights. Since 2011, she's conducted comparative research in both Brazil and in India on the implementation of farmers' rights, along the lines of the legal conflicts surrounding the IP regimes that exist for these different biotech crops. She holds a PhD in anthropology from McGill University. And she's really going to be painting this big picture, talking to us about the rise of seed activism from farmers' rights to seed sovereignty. And I will pass it on to you, Karine. Excited to listen to your talk.
Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. Thank you also for inviting me. Thanks to Alison and all of the organizing committee for putting this event together. Is this working, right? You're seeing and hearing me? Yes, okay, perfect. So let me just share my screen. Here it is. Okay, so just a second. Okay. So good afternoon to everyone. Sarah asked me to talk a little bit today about the rise of seed activism around the world in the past few decades. And before I start, the picture you see on this slide was my introduction to seed activism. So that was back in 2006. I was in southern Brazil doing a human rights internship, and I was invited to this day-long event organized by the Pastoral Land Commission, and the theme that year was seeds, peasant seeds, or as they're known in Brazil, Creole seeds. So it was a religious event, but it was also very political. This is another picture I took that day, and you can see farmers carrying these heavy bags of seeds on their shoulders with the logos of the large multinational companies at the time. So there's Monsanto and DuPont and all of them. And they walk through the little town in silence. And then, and I don't know if you can tell on the picture, but they're bound by chains. So at the end of the walk, they got rid of the chains and they set them on fire. So it was very powerful, and it made a very strong impression on me. That's when I started researching these issues, and I've been researching them ever since. So there has been clearly a resurgence of activism around seeds starting in the mid-1980s, but mostly since the late 1990s. And this coincides with the commercial introduction of GMOs. And I won't be talking about GMOs per se, but I just want to emphasize that by changing the legal doctrine and by allowing for the first time patents on plants, GMOs have triggered a drive to privatize plant genetic resources, not only GMOs, but plants in general, through patents, but also through the strengthening of plant breeders' rights and also seed regulations. To give just a few examples of activism around seeds, we can mention here GMOs, voluntary reapers, the movement that started in France and then spread to England and other countries around the world, GM-free territories, the Ban Terminator campaign that was in 2006 at the Biodiversity Convention in Brazil, the March Against Monsanto, which started in the US in 2013, open source seed initiatives, and we'll hear more from Jack in a moment. Seed Savers Network, of course, all around the world, and CD Sundays and all sorts of seed swaps events. So this is a seed swap in Brazil. Community seed libraries, and also free seeds networks in Latin America. These initiatives are extremely dynamic. They're innovative, both in terms of concepts, so seed sovereignty, open source seeds, and in terms of strategies. I'm thinking, for example, of the civil disobedience of voluntary reapers or the seed bombs of guerrilla gardeners. These initiatives are locally grounded because seeds are, right? But they're also connected globally. And importantly, and that's been mentioned, this activism around seeds bridges the rural-urban divide. So of course, peasants, farmers, indigenous people are on the front lines of struggle around seeds, but there's also an urban dimension. So, the March Against Monsanto was mostly urban-based. Guerrilla gardening is mostly urban. Seed swaps are both rural and urban. So this really is this dimension to the movement. Finally, seed activism is decentralized and it is extremely diverse. It is best described in a similar way to food sovereignty as a movement of movements. But what unites these initiatives and these mobilizations is that they're aimed at defending individual and collective rights to seeds and agrobiodiversity against corporate enclosures or privatization. So struggles around seeds have given rise to a number of new terms and concepts. And what I'd like to do today is unpack some of these terms. So we have farmers' rights, the farmer's privilege, which I personally don't like, so that's why I put it in quotation marks, but it's out there, so it's important to talk about it. Peasant rights and seed sovereignty, of course. And as you can see, the first three expressions are closely associated with an international legal instrument. So farmers' rights are linked to the Food and Agriculture Organization, it's a mouthful, International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, and it's known for short as the Plant Treaty. Farmers' privilege is associated to the UPOV Convention. Wait, technical problem here. So it's the International Union for the Protection of New Varieties of Plants. UPOV is an intergovernmental organization that promotes intellectual property rights on plant varieties, also known as plant breeders' rights or plant variety protection. These are all synonyms. So it's basically an organization that defends the interests of the plant breeding industry. Peasants' rights emerge in the context of the United Nations declarations on the rights of peasants and other people working in rural areas. And that declaration was adopted recently in 2018. So I'll talk about it a little bit. And in addition to these three terms, I would like to talk briefly about another key concept that has been forwarded by seed activists, and it's seed sovereignty. In the case of seed sovereignty, there's no single legal instrument, but multiple grassroots declaration. And Clayton and Don will talk to us in the next session about how to create such declarations. And I'm really looking forward to that. So we tend to forget this, but until recently, we did not even have a vocabulary to talk about farmers' contribution to the breeding of plants. We just took it for granted. And it's only in the early 1980s that two early seed activists, Pat Mooney and Kerry Fowler, coined the term farmers' rights as a counterweight to plant breeders' rights. And farmers' rights were officially recognized in 2001 with the adoption of the FAO Plant Treaty. There was a lot of resistance to the concept, but it was finally recognized in that treaty. So Article 9 of the FAO Plant Treaty recognizes the historical contribution of farmers and indigenous people to the development and conservation of crop biodiversity. It also says that states have a responsibility to guarantee farmers' rights to the protection of traditional knowledge, to equitable benefit sharing, and to participate in decisions regarding plant genetic resources. And finally, as you can see at the bottom, it also says in that article that farmers have the right to save, use, exchange, and sell farm-safe seeds and propagating material. Now, another expression that appears during the same period is the farmer's privilege. And this is essentially industry pushing back against the notion of farmers' rights. The expression is commonly used by UPOV and the plant breeding industry to refer to the right of farmers to save seeds for replanting from varieties that are protected by plant breeders' rights. Under the latest act of the UPOV Convention, it's called the 1991 Act, not only are farmers' rights to save seeds an exception, but it is an optional one. This means that this exception is not automatic. It is a country has to incorporate this exception into its domestic legislation. But not only that, this exception is very narrowly defined. So it is restricted to a farmer's own holding or land. So no seed exchange, no seed donations. And as we know, circulation of seed is essential to peasant seed systems. It also said that this exception has to be within reasonable limits and subject to safeguarding the legitimate interest of the breeder. So it's a very narrow exception or privilege. Now, what is the problem with the farmer's privilege? Well, there's several, but what is a privilege? It's a favor, it's a concession, and most importantly, it's something that can be revoked or withdrawn anytime, right? As opposed to something to which someone is entitled. According to UPOV in the plant breeding industry, seed saving is not a right, but an exception to the rights of the breeder. The implication being that plant breeders' rights prevail over those of farmers. And there really is an irony here, because intellectual property rights were historically considered grants of privileges and explicitly recognized as exceptions to the rules against monopolies. And what we see today is, at least in industry parlance, is a complete reversal, whereby it is farmers' seed-saving practices that are couched as privileges and exceptions subordinated to the dominant rights of plant breeders. So what we see during this period is that, on the one hand, plant breeders' rights have been significantly expanded, primarily with the adoption of this 1991 Act of the UPOV Convention. And on the other hand, the FAO Plant Treaty has failed to protect farmers' rights, mostly because of the lack of political will on the part of some governments. And I think this failure of the Plant Treaty is well illustrated by the fact that the African Center for Biodiversity, the ACB, which is it's an NGO based in South Africa, recently took position against South Africa's ratification of the Plant Treaty. So essentially, they've given up on trying to make it work. The ACB argues that the treaty is fundamentally flawed. So industry benefits from accessing plant genetic resources through the multilateral system that is set up by the treaty, while the farmers' rights provisions of the treaty have not been enforced. So South Africa is now in this bizarre situation where industry supports the plant treaty, but not farmers and civil society. Now, the response of agrarian activists to the failure to implement farmers' rights has been to move towards peasants' rights to seeds and seed sovereignty. The expression peasants' rights was developed in the context of the negotiation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other People Working in Rural Areas. This declaration, I don't know if know most of you have heard of it. It's started as an initiative of La Via Campesina, which brought it to the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. And after years of negotiation, it was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2018. With this declaration, peasants' rights, including rights to seeds and agrobiodiversity, are recognized for the first time in an international human rights instrument. The hope is that the declaration might one day become a convention, and a lot of the inspiration for this declaration came from the conventions on the rights of indigenous people. But for now, of course, it is only soft law. The declaration is broad-ranging, but it includes an article on rights to seeds. And having participated in some of the negotiation sessions, I can tell you that rights to seed were really among the most controversial provisions. This is Article 19 of the declaration. It is too long to reproduce on a slide, but I've put some of the most important points. They include peasants and other people working in rural areas have the right to maintain, control, protect, and develop their own seeds and traditional knowledge. States shall take measures to support peasant seed systems and promote the use of peasant seeds and agrobiodiversity. And states shall ensure that seed policies, plant variety protection, and other IP laws, certification schemes, and seed marketing laws respect and take into account the rights, needs, and realities of peasants and other people working in rural areas. So the hope is that this declaration can reaffirm peasant rights as human rights that prevail over IP rights and not the other way around as we see today. Just quickly to situate the US in this legal landscape. So the US is a party to UPOV, to the UPOV 1991 Act. And it is the country that most aggressively imposes UPOV 91 in its trade negotiations with countries in Global South. The US recently joined the Plant Treaty in 2017, and the US strongly opposes the concept of peasants' rights. It is one of only 8 countries that voted against the declaration at the UN General Assembly. Finally, last but not least, seed sovereignty is perhaps the most important concept and to have been put forward by seed activists in recent years. The first reference I found to seed sovereignty was in the context of a women's seed forum organized by La Via Campesina in Asia in 2007. And since then, the concept has been adopted widely. Seed sovereignty is, of course, intrinsic to food sovereignty, because seeds and seed saving are the very foundation of seed sovereignty. At the core of food sovereignty lies the idea that peasants and farmers must regain autonomy and control over what they produce and how they produce it. So seed sovereignty in turn involves regaining complete autonomy over all seed activities, including breeding. So it marks a shift from defending more limited notions such as farm seed saving or farmers' rights to plant genetic resources toward a broader and more radical agenda. So seed sovereignty activists favor stewardship over ownership. Many seed sovereignty activists reject access and benefit sharing, which La Via Campesina is described as, quote, being offered the proceeds from the theft of our seeds. Seed sovereignty activists also reject a certain model whereby farmers can register the varieties in the same way as commercial plant breeders. And the experience of India, where this is allowed, shows that farmers do not derive any benefits from this approach, nor does this approach support peasant seed systems and agrobiodiversity. And finally, seed sovereignty activists defend the idea that seeds should not be the object of intellectual property and rights and regulations, that they should be part of the commons, so that seeds should be freely shared and exchanged. So seed sovereignty activists continue to fight international instruments, laws, regulations, and trade agreements that restrict rights to seeds. But in the end, they firmly believe that what really matters is that we keep seeds in our hands. And I'd like to quote an Ecuadorian seed activist who said to me, what really matters is that we are able to produce our seeds, share them, and keep going. If everything else fails, we'll come back to our farms and continue producing seeds. And with this, I'll turn it over to Jack, who's been both a theoretician and a practitioner of open source seeds and seed sovereignty. Thank you.
First, it's Anna Main. Thank you so much, Karim. This was really wonderful. I love how you started it off with your own little activism in Brazil, following the activists there. Super powerful images. I thank you for all the education. I feel like we all know a little bit more now about these terms and where they come from. So this is wonderful moving forward. I'm gonna first of all pass it on to Anna Main, who I think has joined us, even though it's like midnight now or something, or really late at night. Anne, are you able to join in?
Able to see me?
Perfect. Thank you so much for staying up this late. I'm just gonna quickly introduce you and your wonderful bio. So Anna Mena is reaching us from Kenya, and she is the National Coordinator of Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya. Her work is centered on challenging the false solutions of genetic engineering, green revolution. If you were in our last session, you heard Fatima talking about the new green revolution, carbon markets to combat climate change in Africa at both the national, regional, and international level. And she's done this on forums with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and on the Convention of Biological Diversity. She's also participated in other forums such as the World Congress for Rural Women in Durban. And then on the ground, she is building the capacity in West Africa. She's actively involved in various civil society organizations. She wears many different hats. She does campaigning, she does advocacy, fundraising, policy analysis, and much, much more stuff, and is being instrumental in building networks between Eastern and Southern African small-scale farmers. She holds a bachelor's degree in economics and several certificates on, understanding the risks of GMOs and so forth. And she will be talking to us about the threats of seed sovereignty, of GMOs, and corporate control from a West African perspective. So without further ado, I will leave it up to you to continue talking. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Sarah. As you introduced me, I'm Anne Maina from Kenya. I'm speaking more from the East African perspective. Based in Kenya, but we work quite closely with different actors in Africa. I think the previous presenter has spoken about the great work that's done by the groups like the Africa Center for Biosafety and the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, where we are members, and they are great allies to our work. Today, I want to speak more from, I'll give examples from the Kenyan perspective and generally from Africa on the issue of genetically modified foods and corporate control and how they threaten our seed diversity. To begin with, maybe we in Africa call genetically modified foods as seeds of colonialism, because these are things that have been introduced to Africa by a lot of the corporates. All of them from various different bay, and I'll talk more about it. But to look at the Kenyan perspective, you'll see, like in Kenya, an example in East Africa, the Kenyan government banned GMOs in Kenya, importation of GMOs in 2012 through a cabinet decision and a presidential decree. We as the Kenya Biodiversity Coalition, and now we have registered as the Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya, did a lot of campaign work in leading to this ban, and a lot of campaigning on issues of having a strict liability clause and precautionary principles as per our constitution 2010 and our agenda. But if you look at recent years, there's been a lot of pressure to lift the ban. And in 2019, again, the cabinet made a decision to approve BT cotton, GMO cotton, with the argument that it is basically for fiber to lead to the revival of our textile industry. But that is wrong, because we have continuously told them that BT cotton is only 40% fiber, 60% is cotton seed cake, cotton oil, cotton straw, and a lot of other products that are used for feeding animals. And there's a lot of pressure. Kenya, being in East Africa, is a key point where the spread of GMOs is really targeted. South Africa is the other country which has opened its doors to GMOs in Southern Africa. In Western Africa, there's been increased pressure on Nigeria, and also a country like Burkina Faso, which had at one point accepted BT cotton, but were forced to withdraw because they lost their niche world market because of the low standard of the cotton. So in East Africa, there's also the big push for BT maize, GMO cassava, and more crops are on trials, including animal GMOs. Why are we so against these genetically modified foods? We look at it as a triple crisis. By introducing GMOs, which include animal, plant, and human health concerns, there's a lot of use of chemicals, fertilizers, and pesticides, a lot of the pesticides which are toxic, leading to loss of nutrients, macronutrients, a lot of antibiotic resistance. I think the case in America is quite popular. We talk about the case of Dwayne Johnson and the other over 20,000 cases that have come up against Roundup and its toxic ingredient, glyphosate. There are also a lot of environmental concerns, especially related to loss of pollinators like bees, the challenges that are related to soil health, because the increased use of pesticides and fertilizers, not looking at it holistically, is leading to a lot of challenges, the use of agrochemicals and the death of soil and all that. Looking at the socioeconomic consequences, the price, for example, of BT cotton, from looking at the experience, for example, in Burkina Faso, the price rose over 30 times from the conventional cotton. And so farmers will have that challenge of accessing and buying this cotton every season. And of course, the multinationals, their main agenda is profit. There are like 4 main crops that are GM all over the world: cotton, maize, soya, rapeseed, which is also called canola. And you can see a lot of countries that have commercialized in the US, Brazil, Argentina, and Canada. You see the multinationals now. Monsanto has been bought by Bayer, and all these companies from Dow, DuPont, Pioneer, they all said they're all aiming to sell GMO seed and associated products, including herbicides, and these will have an impact in terms of the sustainability in Africa. And of course, Africa is a huge market, especially if you look at some of the staples, maize, cassava, and all these. So there's a lot of lobby work that goes behind the scenes by these companies to advise our governments on GMO regulation and the work that farmers, and a lot of insistence that farmers need to work with GMOs to increase productivity, forgetting that Africa for many years has produced food through smallholder farmers, but and this food has been sufficient and healthy. But now this monocropping. When we talk about farmer managed seed systems, which is what we are advocating for, I went and I looked at this poster that was done by one of our partners, Africa Center for Biodiversity. And looking at African farming systems, they're based on smallholder farmers who have for many years perfected the art of selecting their seed, breeding, planting, exchanging, and for various uses. You find that farmers, it's not just about production. There are seeds that are used during, for example, ceremonies. There are seeds that are seeds that are grown, that are taken even when girls are getting married, for them to go and begin their life in agriculture. Seeds food that is grown and is for the taste, is for animals. And this has continued for many years. However, there's a threat to this because of the push by multinationals to control and reduce even the amount of staples that people are accessing, to reduce it to just maize and a few other starch crops. When you talk about the farmer seed system, this is a system where farmers or peasants and local indigenous people manage and propagate their seed materials, including in situ and ex situ. they reuse, they exchange, and all this. And this is situated within the farmer system. You know that seed is naturally heterogeneous and diverse, and 80% of the seed supply in Africa comes from this system. When you go to the commercial seed system, it is all about making it uniform, standard, and all that. So you find that a lot of farmers in Africa and the seed system continue to be displaced because of the big push for adoption of genetically modified food and corporate control. Uh, a lot of political advances in terms of policy. A lot of the people who lead policy within Africa are educated in the West. They get scholarship from all these multinationals and big philanthropies, for example, the Bill and the Melinda Gates, and all of them are really taught on issues of bringing GMOs, agribusiness in the name of not recognizing farmer managed seed systems. And this is quite a big challenge because, like, even in look at Kenya, farmer seed systems are not recognized anywhere in the law. At least in countries like Uganda, farmers can exchange seeds, maybe 5 villages within an area. But in Kenya, there's even a strict law where there are seed inspectors who can come to your farm or to your granary and check if the seed is contaminated with seed from a multinationals, like you see in the case of the farmer in Canada who was sued by Monsanto for having GM rapeseed, yet he was an organic farmer. So with this lack of recognition and support, seed diversity has also been changing and narrowing over the years. And you find there's a dependency in countries even which have not adapted GMOs. There's a dependency of high commercial value maize, the hybrids. The governments, some governments support their farmers by giving them this corporate seed during planting season, and fertilizer subsidies and extension services, even coming from the multinationals. There's also the issue of seed aid, where you find a lot of humanitarian response, even sometimes being not happening in a deliberate way. Farmers, for example, who are facing challenges with food, are given, for example, maize to mill and get food, but they say, let's save a little to grow. And this is negatively affecting our seed diversity. The importance of farmer managed systems is important because of our diversity. With diversity, there is more resilience. Food and seed sovereignty is important in terms of building resilience for farmers, and spreading the risk, especially in these times of climate change, where diversity is required because of the changing climatic patterns and nutritional diets. We are losing a lot of our diverse foods in Africa. And this is, we are seeing a lot of cases of communicable lifestyle diseases going up, diabetes, high blood pressure, and all this because of the concentration on a few static crops, as opposed to diversity, sweet potatoes, millet, sorghums, and all those. And there's a big threat even to the diverse crops like millet, sorghum, because there's even an interest in changing them and getting them to be genetically modified. And of course, we need a lot of emphasis to promote agrobiodiversity for nutritional security and environmental benefits and genetic diversity. So what are we doing as a part of institutions or and government organization working in Africa, in Kenya, to promote seed diversity? One of the challenges that we faced when we were training and teaching farmers, policymakers on issues of genetically modified foods, they would ask, so where do we get the seed? We've lost our seeds. We can't access it in the market. If I need seed, a hybrid, I can get it from an agro seed company, an agrochemical company. I can get it easily. And so we started this process of campaigning and working with especially women, elderly women who have for many years traditionally been the seed savers, the people who kept the seed, and bringing them back through the women, the younger women, teaching them how to select, even on the farm, how do you select, how do you keep your seed. And so we are supporting various communities in Kenya to build community seed banks, because the law is very strict and farmers are not recognized as seed savers. We are calling them community seed learning facilities. We have this one that we have finished building in, we have built in Tharaka Nithi County in Kenya. We also have been working with various member organizations. I work for a network building seed banks in areas like Butula in Busia County, in Molo in Nakuru County, with various members. And this is a process where we support them even in terms of how do they keep their seeds and grow them. And of course, looking also at the younger generation, changing the kids' perception, starting off with festivals, fun things for children. Oh, can we have a festival? Can we cook local foods? Do you know this food? Do you know cassava? Do you know yams? And eventually building that appreciation of local varieties, seed diversity, food diversity, and of course, promoting food sovereignty. One quote that keeps on challenging us or encouraging us is that there cannot be promotion of farmer seed systems which ensure seed diversity without acknowledging the recognition of farmers' rights, which are equated to human rights. So farmers' rights are human rights, and they have to be situated within those rights for farmers to do that.